All right, so here's the homework on the tangent functions. We have a few graphs here. There was nothing about phase shifts or vertical displacements. Actually, I don't even see a vertical displacement, but it's the same concept. You would just, if you had a vertical displacement, you would just simply take your midline up, but your graph pretty much is the same thing. It's just the curve would be up higher or down lower depending. The phase shift is moving your asymptotes. So why don't I do an example of one that has a phase shift? I kind of like this one right here. And one of the things I like about this worksheet is that notice that they don't give you the graph, like they don't label it. And that is going to help you because if I had this problem that we did in the notes, with things like your asymptote or the pi over 8 and how tiny that is. That way you can stretch it out a little bit more. But why don't we take a look at this second example as my homework help for you. So first of all, remember B has to be, if you have a phase shift, B needs to be on the outside of the parentheses. So what we have to do here is we have to divide everything by 2. Okay, so, or basically what we're doing is factoring a 2 out. So I'm going to do that up here. So I have pi over 2, and what I need to do is I want to, it's like you're undistributing a 2. Okay, when you undistribute a 2, what you're doing is you're dividing both of these by 2. Well, that's easy. This is just going to be x, right? Now, when you divide pi over 2 divided by 2, that's the same thing as saying pi over 2 times a half, which gives you pi over 4. So the function, right, that I'm going to rewrite is going to be y equals the tangent of 2, and then we're going to say x minus pi over 4. So B is 2, we have a phase shift of right pi over 4. So what I do is I go ahead and get the asymptote, forget about my phase shift, and then I just go over. So, so the first thing, remember, you find your asymptote. I'll just call it ASY. So my and by the way, the worksheet says amplitude. It should not say amplitude. I think that was a typo. It should say asymptote, because there's no such thing as the amplitude on a tangent function. But the asymptote, remember, is going to be pi divided by 2b, and b is 2, right? So it looks like my asymptote is pi over 4. Okay, now I'm going to come over here. Oh, I wish I had a pencil, but I just want to do it really lightly. So let's do this. So this, let's say that this is pi over 4. And this would be, so if that's a fourth, we'll say this is pi over 2. And this would be 3 pi over 4. And I don't know if I'm going to need a pi, but I'm going to go ahead and make that a pi. Okay. Now, right here, I'm just going to do a real small little asymptote. I'm just going to do a real small asymptote because I'm going to be shifting it here. That's going to be the original asymptote of without the phase shift. Now, we need to find where the next asymptote is going to be. So now we're going to find the period. Remember the period, so it's pi over 4. The period is just pi over b, right? Which is just going to be pi over 2. Okay. So that means I'm going to go pi over 2 units over. So pi over 2 is 1, 2 dashes. So I'm going to go 1, 2 dashes, and there would be my next asymptote if I were doing this. But remember, we're shifting it right pi over 4, right? So my phase shift is going to be right pi over 4. So 1 dash over is pi over 4. So I'm going to take my asymptotes and move them 1 dash over. So I'm going to come over here, boop, pi over 4 units over. Gosh, I wrote all over the top of that. But that is my first asymptote. And then here was the second asymptote. Go right 1 dash over. and there's your second asymptote, and now you're ready to draw your graph. There's no reflection, so the graph would follow the asymptote down, hit right here in the middle, and go down, and that big red graph is your tangent. And I wish I had known it was going to be over here. I wouldn't have wrote it all over here. Don't worry about the initial interval. That's kind of what we just did here in blue. That's where we did, but what we did was we took the initial and moved right over to. So I mean, for extra practice, if you want to list what we did, where the asymptotes would be pi over 4, 3 pi over 4, 5 pi over 4, and so on and so forth. So on all of these, you can go ahead and, I mean, you can do a real light sketch of the interval, but you don't need to list anything. And I don't see any vertical displacements, and that should say asymptote, not amplitude. So you can change all of those to asymptote, okay, on all of these. And then the only other thing was on the second page, the graph of y equals tan x translated down 4 units and left 1. So remember in the notes I gave you this function right here. So it's kind of the same thing I was saying. If there's a phase shift or vertical displacement, you put the numbers in. If not, you put a 0. If there's a reflection, or if there's talking anything about the period, then those are going to be put in, or you just call them, you're just going to make them 1. So you just put in what you need. So this one says the graph of your parent tan function translated down 4 units, left 1. Well, remember K tells you up or down, and so since it's down, it's going to be a -4. I don't know where to put the negative. There we go. And left 1 would be actually KH, would be a -1. So putting that in, they don't say anything about the, they don't mention anything about a reflection. They don't mention anything about the period. So you would just put those for 1. So it would be tangent, parentheses, x plus 1 minus 4, and that would be left 1, down 4, and that would be your answer. All right, guys, that's it on homework help.